Ever since I was old enough to plan vacations on my own, I've been obsessed with the idea of a serene getaway. Just me, a cozy cabin in the mountains, and no one to disturb my peace. But, of course, my family had other ideas. Let me introduce you to the cast of this little drama. There's my golden sister, Karen. Yes, her name is Karen, but it's so fitting I couldn't make this up if I tried. Her two rambunctious kids, and my overbearing parents who think Karen's every whim is gospel. For years, Karen's family vacations have taken priority. Her kids' school schedules, her budget constraints, her preferences, everything revolves around her. My own plans were brushed aside with a dismissive, "Oh, we'll all go together," which really meant, we'll all follow Karen's lead and you'll pay for most of it. This year, I decided enough was enough. I'd been working tirelessly for months, saving up for my dream trip to Aspen. I'd booked a charming Airbnb, lined up activities like skiing and hot springs, and even scheduled some time to just read by a roaring fireplace. It was going to be perfect. Then came the phone call. "Sweetie," my mom said, her voice laced with that tone that always meant trouble. "Karen's kids are off school next week and they've been dying to go somewhere snowy. You don't mind if we all tag along, do you?" Tag along? That was rich. What she meant was, we're hijacking your vacation and turning it into Karen's dream trip. Before I could protest, Karen was on the line, gushing about how much the kids needed this, how tight her budget was, and how she couldn't possibly afford Aspen without some family support. By the time I hung up, my perfect solo vacation had morphed into a chaotic family affair. Again. This time, though, I wasn't going to let them steamroll me. I'd learned my lesson from the last 3 vacations that ended with me babysitting Karen's kids while she and my parents enjoyed the spa or fancy dinners. I needed an escape plan. For weeks, I played along, nodding and smiling as Karen and my mom made plans. They chose a larger cabin that I was expected to chip in for naturally, decided on group activities that catered to the kids, and conveniently forgot all about my skiing and hot springs. Meanwhile, I was working on my secret. I'd booked a second Airbnb, a small, secluded place just a half-hour's drive from the main cabin. It was the perfect hideaway. I'd also arranged for a friend, Sophie, to be my decoy. She'd call me with an emergency that would require me to leave the main cabin for a few days. Sophie thought the whole thing was hilarious and agreed to play along. Everything was set. The trip started predictably enough. We arrived at the larger cabin, and within minutes, Karen's kids were screaming and running around like caffeinated squirrels. My parents were fussing over Karen, who was dramatically complaining about the altitude, and I was left to unpack everyone's bags because you're so organized, sweetie. Day 1 was a disaster. The kids refused to go sledding because it was too cold. Karen decided she needed an entire day to recover from the drive, and my parents insisted on a family board game night that ended with the kids flipping the Monopoly board. By the time I collapsed into bed, I was ready to scream. The next morning, Sophie's call came right on schedule. I feigned concern, told everyone I'd have to leave for a couple of days, and promised to be back before the end of the trip. Karen barely looked up from her phone. My mom waved me off with a distracted, "Drive safe," and my dad grunted something about being back in time to help pack up, and just like that, I was free. The drive to my secret Airbnb felt like shedding 100 pounds of stress. The cabin was everything I dreamed of, a snug little A-frame surrounded by towering pines, with a wood-burning stove, a plush armchair by the window, and complete silence. For the first time in days, I could breathe. I spent the next 2 days skiing, soaking in the hot springs, and finally cracking open the book I'd been meaning to read for months. It was heaven. I sent my family a couple of perfunctory texts to keep up appearances, but otherwise ignored my phone. This was my time. When I returned to the main cabin, I braced myself for the backlash. Sure enough, Karen was in full meltdown mode. Her kids had been bored out of their minds, and she'd had to do everything without my help. My mom was upset that I'd missed a family bonding experience, and my dad just muttered something about selfishness. I'd anticipated this reaction, though, and I didn't let it bother me. "I'm sorry you felt that way," I said calmly, "but Sophie really needed me, and I'm glad I could be there for her." Over the next few days, I endured the passive-aggressive comments and cold shoulders with a secret smile. They had no idea I'd finally had the vacation I deserved. For once, I'd played by my own rules, and it felt amazing. Back home, Karen tried to guilt me into paying for extras from the trip, like the kids' new snow gear and the cabin cleaning fee. I refused, citing my own expenses. My parents grumbled, but I stood firm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the family doormat. Now, whenever the topic of a family vacation comes up, I smile and say, "Let me know how it goes." They've stopped trying to drag me along, and Karen has had to adjust to planning trips without my wallet. It's been liberating. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. Sometimes you have to put yourself first, even if it means upsetting a few people along the way. Life's too short to spend every vacation catering to someone else's whims, and if they don't like it, well, that's their problem, not mine.